Hey, my name is Petra Cruz, and I'm obsessed with all things birth, but especially VBAC. I am a birth doula and mom who had a vaginal birth after 3 cesareans. In this podcast, we dive deep into the inspirational world of vaginal birth after cesarean. In each episode, you'll hear inspiring VBAC stories, practical tips from professionals who've championed the VBAC cause, as well as my personal journey and how it might help you on yours. From mindset shifts to evidence-based practices, you'll leave each episode feeling inspired and informed. Get ready to soak in the wisdom, embrace the strength within, and join this incredible VBAC community. This is the VBAC Junkie Podcast. Hello, hello. Now, this podcast is all about VBAC and we love our birth stories, but there are also times when I have these amazing professionals that come on and give us some great tips. Because, the birth is like only one part of this journey. We also have to think about the postpartum. Now, if you're planning on breastfeeding, this episode is absolutely for you. So I got to chat with Alex, and she is an international board certified lactation consultant. She is so passionate about helping moms feel seen and heard on their breastfeeding journeys. She is a mom of two herself, and the experience she had while seeking breastfeeding support with her first baby is actually what catapulted her into changing careers and being the change for new moms. She believes that when we support moms, we support their babies. And this is so true, by far so true. In this episode, we talked about so many different things. Even if you are not planning to breastfeed, you might want to even listen in on this because there's so many different tips for helping you on this journey, even if you're planning to bottle feed. So without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, thank you so much for joining me today, Alex. I'm so excited to dive into all things breastfeeding because I feel like it's so important whether we have a VBAC or a cesarean because we have to plan for it. I know a lot of us feel like it's supernatural, and we should just get the hang of it, but a lot of times we're both learning. So I would love to know where your journey began to even become an IBCLC.
Yes, first, just thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to chatting with you. So my journey to becoming a board certified lactation consultant, which is IBCLC, started with my first child. So I was going into becoming a mom, knowing that I wanted to breastfeed my baby, and that's kind of as far as it went. I did plan, I did take a prenatal class, and I learned what I thought I needed to learn. And then when it actually came time to his birth and arrival and his first latch and feeding him, it was way more difficult than I thought it was going to be. And we had what I've been calling like a sort of textbook start to breastfeeding. Like I had an unmedicated vaginal delivery. So we didn't have like any potential interventions that could intervene. And it was like skin to skin right away, he latched right away. Like the things that they tell you are going to be meaning like you're going to have a successful start. And it was really, really painful. Like it was really difficult, but I was in excruciating pain no matter what we did. And as a brand new mom, I was like, oh, well, this is normal. And it's not. And so I pushed through the pain for way longer than I should have. It was 2 weeks, probably just over 2 weeks before I went to see a lactation consultant to find out what the heck was going on. And it was the experience that I had with that lactation consultant that actually led me to becoming one myself, because ultimately she found the root cause, but through the process, I did not feel supported. I did not feel like she was actually listening to me. It didn't feel like she really understood my goals. I left the appointments feeling very upset. It reached a point in my last appointment where I was essentially given an ultimatum of like, well, this is your only option or you're not going to be able to provide milk for him. And that it just didn't sit right with me. And so after that appointment, I mean, I called my husband like in tears and was like, I'm not going back. Like I have to figure this out myself. And so I did what a lot of moms do, turn to the internet. But what I was doing was taking like classes from the International Breastfeeding Center and like really diving in deeper. And through the process was like, oh my gosh, you know what? No other mom needs to feel this way. That was not okay. And I'm going to change this, and decided to spend several years becoming an IBCLC, which is essentially a specialized healthcare provider for lactation and breastfeeding. Like we have knowledge that runs deep. we are the healthcare provider to support you in your breastfeeding journey at any stage. And it was an unfortunate way to get here, but I know now that it was what was supposed to happen so that I can be here for other new parents.
Oh my gosh, I love that. And I feel like a lot of times our own journeys is actually what propels us into our new, like, found love or passion in helping others. And I just love that. So, how did that translate to your next birth?
Yeah, so at that point, so a couple of years had gone by, and I just mentioned it takes a while to become an IBCLC because it's not just like a class you take. You have to actually mentor under someone and earn clinical hours and like get that hands-on experience. And so by the point when my second was born, I was 10 weeks away from writing my board exam. So I was at the point of like, I'm about to become a board certified lactation consultant. And so I was on a mission to make sure that this breastfeeding journey did not turn out like the first. And the biggest hurdle was going to be a potential tongue tie. That was the underlying issue with my firstborn. That was why breastfeeding was so painful, and it didn't need to be. And, there's a lot still unknown around tongue ties, but there is a lot that we do know, and there is the potential genetic link there. So I knew in the back of my mind, okay, this baby could have a tongue tie. So what am I going to do to still have a successful breastfeeding journey? And for me, that meant collecting colostrum. And that is harvesting my colostrum ahead of time so that I could have it in case we ran into the same latching challenges that I had with my firstborn, because with him, the only solution I was offered was formula. And that, even like when I review and replay my own situation in my mind with the knowledge I have now, like there was so much that could have been done, and that didn't have to be the first step, but I understand where they were coming from. And so in this case, I was like, I'm just going to have my own milk to supplement my baby if he's having any challenges latching. And then if he were, I knew how to hand express because I was a lactation consultant, but through the process of collecting colostrum. So that was the main difference between the two. And I did end up using that colostrum that I collected because he had a tongue tie and we had some latching challenges that we had to work through, but he was never supplemented once with formula. So that was the main difference. And I kind of owe that to colostrum collection.
Oh my gosh, that is incredible. So, what was your personal journey with harvesting your own colostrum? Because I know I've talked to moms about it, before they give birth as that being an option. And a lot of them are very confused on what that looks like. Like, are you supposed to get ounces and ounces or drops, just little drops here and there? So, what does that look like? What did that look like for you? And what do you suggest to others?
Yeah. So the first thing is you need to be at a certain point in your pregnancy. You need to be at least 36 weeks, 36 to 37. Now, we do have research that shows 36 weeks is usually safe. You do want to run it past your primary care provider before you collect colostrum. In my case, I was just before 37 weeks, I think. So I had, there was no risk of complications. We were an otherwise healthy pregnancy. And I think I felt comfortable. I might have been 36 and 5. So we were close. But basically, the way that I did it is really similar to how I suggest it to clients and expecting parents, is to spend a little bit of time practicing hand expression without the expectation of colostrum coming. So basically, hand expression is just a method where you're manually sort of massaging and compressing the breasts to extract the colostrum. And that's the very first milk your body's producing. It is produced in pregnancy in that second trimester. And it's because it's baby's first milk, it's produced in very small quantities. So the reason I say don't have expectations of milk is just going to come pouring out right away, because first we really need to hone in on this skill. And then second is we need that realistic expectation of only a couple drops are coming out. So for me, the very first time I hand expressed, I maybe collected, and this was between 2 sessions. So one in the morning, one in the evening. I did about 10 to 15 minutes each time. Between both of those, I believe it was 0.1 ml. So that point one, as a lactation consultant, I was like, yes, like this is amazing. And I was like, this, it's working. My colostrum's here. Like that felt really cool. And like, as a mom, it was like validation, like, yes, my body can do this again. Even though I was a lactation consultant, mom of two, I still had that voice of like, oh, well, that's not enough. Like that was only, and I kind of had to fight that a bit because I was like, it's normal to feel this way. It's normal to have these feelings and these thoughts. And then the next time I did it was about the same amount. It was not until about probably 5 days later that I might have collected one full mill in a session. But the research says anywhere between 1 and 5 milliliters in that whole time frame. So that whole 3 to 4 weeks you have, that's the average amount that's collected, because your body is going to feed a baby, but the baby's not here yet. So it doesn't make any sense for you to be producing large amounts of milk. The hormonally, basically the brakes are on that says, okay, we do not need to produce this much milk. And so it's very, very small quantities.
Right. And that makes so much sense. And that's what I try to tell my clients too, because I get it. It's so defeating, especially when you like open up Instagram and you see like these women who are collecting so much before they even have a baby. And I mean, a lot of times I've seen personally where, some women are still breastfeeding their other child. And so they're getting all this milk, but I mean, they've been breastfeeding. So yeah, it's hard to see that.
Yeah, it really does depend on your unique circumstances. Like if this is the first time you've ever been pregnant, so your first baby, you're probably, it's going to take a little while to first get the hang of how to actually hand express so milk comes out. And then you're going to be collecting much smaller quantities than if it were your second baby or third or so on, because the body's been through it once before. There's more milk making tissue. And yeah, if you're someone who was able to continue to nurse a toddler through your pregnancy, milk production still reverts back to colostrum. But I have seen in those situations a little bit, a higher volume. So it's so hard, because that's exactly what we do, is we play the comparison game. And it's like, well, I did that. Actually, I did that with my firstborn. I was hand expressing, and this was day 3. So my milk was still in that transition phase. In the video I watched, her milk was just spraying. And mine was just dribbling. And I thought, what am I doing wrong? Like, why doesn't mine look like this? What's wrong with me? And now I know I hadn't fully, my milk hadn't transitioned yet. Colostrum was still in the process. Like my volume wasn't there to be the same as a person in this video. But it's just so easy to say, oh, like mine's not enough, or I'm, doing something wrong.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I love that. And I do feel like a lot of times it can depend also. Like say we have already had our baby, and dependent on what happened throughout the labor and the actual birth, even if it was like your instance where you had an unmedicated vaginal birth and you still had issues. But say, obviously somebody's going for a VBAC and then they end up with a repeat cesarean, now you've got different drugs on board, and now you can be sleepy, baby can be sleepy. So in that specific instance, is there a way that you suggest moms to kind of handle that to make it like an easier transition?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So if they have the opportunity to collect colostrum ahead of time, that is really advantageous, because depending on what, like, so if the cesarean ended up being emergent, or if it was like, trial of labor, and it's like, no, we're just, this is the new plan. The amount of separation afterwards can vary. Like baby might have, a medical issue, there might be in the NICU. So the amount of separation afterwards isn't the same for everyone. And that's an important piece, because that amount of separation usually impacts baby's first latch, which is stimulation to the body, which is, supporting milk production. And so things that I really encourage is skin to skin with partner if the baby cannot be with mom right away. And because the skin to skin, the value, the oxytocin is released, is regulating breathing and body temperature, but it also helps support the baby for when they go to have their first latch. That sort of primes them for being at breast and getting that first latch. The other consideration is, when is milk going to be removed? Because let's say it's just an example of, just the separation in between, cesarean time or mom needing to be stitched up. And then, when she sees baby, that is a much shorter period of time. And, baby's likely going to be back on your body just in a couple hours, and they can have their first latch then. But if there's a situation where baby needs to spend some time in a NICU for a little while, maybe it's a couple hours, maybe it's a day or two, depending on what's going on, then you need a backup plan, because if they're not going to be directly nursing at the breast, you've got to do hand expression and potentially pumping. This is what's going to help protect milk supply. So a lot of the challenges, and I can't say that they're all related to this, but often when there is a cesarean birth, a big challenge is just not having stimulation early enough to the body or frequently enough. And then that's where we end up with this sort of delay in how fast milk transitions. So, if you did colostrum collection during pregnancy, how to hand express, and you can just express that right out into a little cup, or a cup, and then use the syringe, and baby can feed that way. But the hospital will likely give you a pump if your baby's going to be away from you for a little while. But that's definitely something that has to be implemented to protect your breastfeeding relationship.
Yes, absolutely. And I think there is like a misconception on breastfeeding. One thing that I notice so often is that women think, okay, well, I just need to pump every 3 hours to make sure that I have milk when, and then they're like confused as to why their milk is not the way they think it should be coming in. So I feel like just like making sure that we get that point home, that it's about the removal of milk and how like often, because it's like the supply and demand, right?
Yeah. So right after birth, it's hormonally driven, but then that shifts and it becomes supply and demand. And what supply and demand means is basically how much and how often milk is being removed is the demand on the body. And then in return, the body produces the supply that's needed, but it's based on feedback. It's not just, yes, immediately after birth, your body will just produce milk, because as I mentioned, it happens during pregnancy. And then after your baby's born, the placenta is born. It's that birth of the placenta that switches things around hormonally, and milk production starts to really increase. But then the other side of that is to keep telling the body, like, how many babies you had, but your brain, like on this hormonal level, doesn't actually know how many babies it's feeding. It has to figure that out. And the way that it figures that out is through the feedback. I like to equate it to an ice machine inside a fridge. This is not my analogy. If some of my colleagues have used it, but like the ones where there's a bucket in the freezer and it's making ice, and we're taking the ice out, and as long as we're removing it, it makes more. If we stop and that lever goes up, it says, hey, no, we have to stop. Nobody's taking this anymore. And that's very similar to human milk production, is if it's not coming out often, and that's a challenge for new moms. And it's a challenge around education, because if they're told, oh, pump every 3 hours, but biologically we have a baby who's nursing or wants to nurse and feed more than every 3 hours, and we're not matching that, then we can run into these challenges around milk production.
Yes, absolutely. And I love that analogy. That is like an amazing visual, but it's so true. It is so true. So, dependent on how this person gave birth, if there are challenges that they're noticing, like the baby's not latching right, or, the baby's just like fussy at the breast, what is the next step that you suggest the mom to do in order to try to figure things out?
Yeah, first, if they're still in the hospital, I would ask to see the lactation consultant. Now, it would depend on the hospital. Not everyone has an IBCLC on staff. If they do, their shift might not line up with when you give birth. But first, ask to see someone in the hospital. Sometimes their nurses have additional education, because it takes a while to get the hang of it. And it can feel like a really big learning curve for both you and your baby. And sometimes simply just bringing them to the breast to feed isn't as simple as it looks. It can feel kind of awkward. It's like, I'm not sure if I'm lining them up right. And I've seen many times where just a few adjustments and we can get that comfortable latch and baby can drink. And, it's not anything beyond just a couple position adjustments. Sometimes it's a lot more than that. But that's the first thing I would do is if you're in hospital, say like, who can help me? I need some guidance here as far as like holding my baby, positioning them. And from there, once you're discharged, if things are still feeling that same way, or you feel like you're not adequately equipped after leaving the hospital, that's when, you need to take matters into your own hands and start to look for someone who can support you. So, finding a lactation consultant in your local area. If you had a doula, for example, they're great for, they usually have a connection to a lactation consultant, but there's also Google. It's a really, lactation consultant near me, lactation consultant, and then your city. There are like online directories and things, but there's also peer support groups. And I've encouraged clients to have both. Because after my support, after my consultation and follow-up is over, it's still really great to have, someone else who's been through this that you can text and talk to. And so it really does have to be something that you have to decide, because not many people have a physician who will recommend a lactation consultant. A lot of the times they'll provide what they believe is appropriate breastfeeding advice, and sometimes it doesn't always match up with the parents' goals. So it's definitely something that you need to seek out that extra support.
Yes, I think that's perfect. And that's exactly what I always suggest people to do. Like if breastfeeding is like their goal, then I always tell them plan for it before you like give birth. Like do it in pregnancy, like as soon as you think about it. Because you're right, like you can reach out to like lactation consultants or IBCLCs that are in your area that are might not even be directly like related to the hospital. They could be just, off on their own, and some of them do like in hospital calls or in-house calls where they'll come to you and literally come to you and help you. Because like you said, the hospital, if they do have one on staff, a lot of times they work Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, and which is great for them. They have that schedule, but birth happens whenever. So yeah, getting that like early support and just like lining yourself up for success, and just like being pre-prepared, even if it feels like over preparation, it can be so helpful in that transition. If this is your first, second, third, fourth baby, you could have other kids that you're caring for, and you might not have the time to look for all the things or have the clarity. And, dependent on your birth, you can have some type of, who knows, postpartum depression, or you could have trauma that you experience. So that's not going to be like the first thing on your mind. Because I just pull from my own experience. Like I had like my first cesarean, I was not planning for a cesarean. And I just thought like breastfeeding's normal and natural. Like I'll just know how to do it. And then I thought for the same thing, a vaginal birth, like, oh, I'll just know how to do it. My body will do it. And sure, like we can figure that out, but when we're in a hospital system, it just doesn't always pan out that way. And, I personally gave up when I was like 1 or 2 weeks postpartum because I was just like, my baby was crying on the breast all the time. And I was crying with her because I was like, I just don't know what to do. And I didn't know who to reach out to. My doctor was no help. I called them and they were like, oh, you just find a lactation consultant. But I don't have a personal reference. And I was just like, what? Isn't this all related? But yeah, so just like, even though it might feel like a lot, like doing that footwork beforehand can be so beneficial.
Yeah, it really, really is. And I've honestly I see a significant difference with those people who spend that time and learning, educating themselves versus those who are like, oh, well, I'll just figure it out now that the baby's here. Like there's a big difference in just the amount of overwhelm that they're experiencing. Like even if you prepare and plan ahead, it's obviously still a learned experience. But when you're taking a prenatal breastfeeding class, especially one that's been, designed to like really teach you and not just show you breastfeeding positions, you're going to learn about your baby's feeding patterns and sleeping patterns. And so when they start cluster feeding, you're not suddenly thinking, I don't have enough milk, something's wrong, like there's no way, like how are they hungry again? You know, hey, this is biologically normal. This is what I'm going to do. We're going to get through this. And that's a really big difference between feeling that way versus, oh my gosh, this isn't enough. I'm doing something wrong. Like you have to be supplemented. And so it is something where I try and share that if you do want to breastfeed, you really should, like, the time and energy that's going into labor and birth prep, you should devote that time and energy, like, additionally into preparing for feeding your baby.
Yeah, yeah, because it is equally, I mean, equally, if not more important, because your baby's going to be feeding like round the clock. Like, I didn't expect that. Like you said, the cluster feeding, like when I first experienced that, you're right, that thought popped into my head. Like, I'm not making enough milk, like something's wrong with my boobs. Like, it's just like you don't realize it. So, like, taking those classes, and not to say you have to take like a full-on anatomy class or like stuff like that, but maybe even just looking at a picture of what the anatomy of a breast looks like so you can understand that there's like different ducts and different things going on in there, and how hand expression, like how like the best way to hand express to like try to empty those milk ducts. Like maybe you can explain it a little bit better than I can, but that, to me, a visual is so helpful to understand something.
Yeah, and that's, everyone, we're all different types of learners. And so that's why, like, I incorporate, like, with my prenatal breastfeeding class, like, I have the visuals. I'm also speaking. There's also written, because, everyone is so different in how they learn. But yes, I do. You definitely, like, if you're not becoming a lactation consultant, you don't need the deep anatomy, physiology. But yeah, even understanding, like, hey, why did all these veins show up? Like, why are my areolas so big and dark now? Like, that's a question I get. And it's like, this is why your body's getting ready to feed your baby. And then, yeah, things like hand expression and knowing hand placement, because that's different for every single person, because every single body, every single chest is different. We're measuring from where the nipple is and going, about an inch to 2 inches away from the nipple. We're never using the areola as a guide for anything, because everybody's are different shapes and sizes. And so, if you hear something about latching, like, oh, the nipple needs to be in their mouth, even knowing that nipple is different from areola. Or, if you hear something like the areola needs to be in their mouth, well, yeah, if they're small enough, but like there's just so much variety in the human body that, yeah, it is important to at least understand those basic things. And then with going back to hand expression quick, like, practice makes perfect. Like that finger placement, sometimes it needs to be a little bit different. Like I've done it for clients many times, and it's, a couple of tries before we figure out where exactly our fingers need to be so that we're actually emptying the breast and the milk is flowing. So it's also something that just helps you naturally get more familiar with the landscape of your body and how things are shifting and changing, pregnancy to postpartum.
Yes. And I think that's incredible that you said that, because I think it's so important for us to connect with our body and to understand like why something's happening. Like you said, with the veins on the breast and the areolas darkening. So can you touch on that a little bit for people who don't understand why that happens? Because it's incredible.
Yes. So essentially what's going on is your body is getting ready to feed your baby. So when your baby's born, their eyesight is not very good. It's only about 8 to 10, maybe 12 inches in front of their face, which is about the distance from your nipple up to your face. So because baby's eyesight isn't very good, what the body does to help support your baby is darken the areola. So it starts to work as a natural target, if you want to call it that, for your baby to help find and locate the breast. But that's not the only thing that's going on. The areola is getting larger and darker to support that, but also you start to see some little bumps on it called Montgomery glands. Now, some people see these during pregnant or when they're not pregnant, they see them as part of their anatomy. Some people don't. And these bumps show up and they're like, do I have pimples on my areola? Like, what's going on? But they are there's these small little glands, and their purpose is to help your baby breastfeed. They actually secrete a substance that's a little oily. It acts as a natural lubricant and smells like amniotic fluid, the place your baby has been for 9 months that is so familiar to them, and it helps guide them towards the breast. And it's a system that is designed to work, so if it's like we've been talking about, if something's not working, there's a root cause, and you deserve to know what that is. I don't want to skip over the veins part. But yeah, the veining that you'll see like across the chest and the breasts is just in relation to increased blood flow. Like your volume is going up, your breast tissue is expanding, there's more milk making tissue, your boobs get bigger, and all of that, you see the associated network of veins. You can just start to see them very early on in pregnancy, actually. But all of these, like I actually asked these questions on my intake forms, like, because these are such positive signs that we know that the body is doing what it needs to in preparation for eventually feeding baby.
Oh my gosh, I love that you include that. That is incredible. Oh my gosh. But that is great that you explain that. Thank you. Also, so I get this so often too, is where is milk actually made from? Because people so often think that it's just like from what you consume. They don't understand like how milk is made and where it comes from. So could you touch on that just a little bit?
I will put it in the simplest way I can so that we don't turn into like an anatomy lesson here. But basically, inside the breast, there are specialized milk making cells, and they're very close to the to your bloodstream, like your network of capillaries. In short, your breast milk is made from your blood. So it's not made from your stomach contents. It's not, if you eat broccoli, you're not going to have a gassy baby. It doesn't work that way. It has to do, so the nutrients basically are pulled from your blood, and then through the specialized milk making cells, the milk is made, the milk travels through the ducts, exits through the nipple. But because that is not necessarily a well-known thing, a lot of people think that, yeah, what I'm going to eat is going to impact my baby. And in some ways it can, because it's made from your blood. What's in your bloodstream does go into your breast milk. But when we're talking about like foods and like fibrous and foods that would make you gassy because they're going through your intestine and your bacteria are digesting them, it's a different story. But yeah, basically it's made from your blood.
Yes, and that's exactly why I wanted you to kind of explain that because not everybody understands that. And, it's so disheartening when you see these women that are just like, oh my gosh, I can't eat this, I can't eat that, I can't eat it, anything, or I have to have lactation cookies, or, like all the things to try to make my milk better. But it's like, from my understanding, our bodies will pull the nutrients for our body, like our body work
No,
in your
yeah, there's
eyes.
definitely, there are some vitamins and minerals where that's prioritized in the milk. And therefore, like there's a potential for your body to be a little bit more depleted on some of those things. And so, yeah, you're, because it's made from your blood and your body's pulling the nutrients that it needs, you are still producing valuable and nutritious breast milk for your baby, even if you don't have a perfect diet. I just wanted to make sure that I said that, because that's another concern of a lot of parents, is like they start to wonder, like, if like what I'm eating, how is it affecting my baby, thinking that like, oh, if I had this fast food burger, like, oh, and I'm not making quality milk. But like what your baby needs is in that milk.
Yes, exactly. Oh my gosh, I love that. So is there anything that you suggest that moms take vitamin wise, food wise, like while they're breastfeeding, to kind of make sure if they are depleted, that they're still getting like the vitamins and minerals for themselves?
So when it comes to things like that, like supplementing with vitamins or minerals, I always encourage there to be blood work done first, because we want to know for sure where the blood levels are at, so that we know what's appropriate supplementation. Because if you're really deficient and you're just taking a low dose of something, it's not necessarily going to bring your numbers up to where they need to be. Excuse me. So that's something that I really encourage. But the most basic thing that you can do is to make sure you're eating enough food. Water is important. Like you do have to be hydrated, but you don't have to go crazy with hydration and drink tons and tons and tons of fluids, because we don't actually have any evidence that says these massive quantities of fluid will help increase your milk supply. It's more so about making sure your body's hydrated. But the calorie part is so important. It's nutritionally demanding on your body to make milk. You you grew this baby during pregnancy, and if you're breastfeeding, you're still growing this baby. They're just on the outside of your body now. And so we're doing that, and your body now has to recover from birth. And so, and if you had a cesarean, you need to recover from surgery as well. This is a lot of nutrition that's needed afterwards and a lot of calories. This is why, like, those people who do get results from lactation cookies, they likely just needed that extra calorie boost because they are pretty dense. And that's what their body needed. It takes about 20 calories to produce 1 ounce of breast milk. And that's where these numbers of like 350 to 500 extra calories a day come, because the amount everyone produces is different. But if you think about that, that's just to make milk. You still need to fuel yourself and your body's recovery and healing. And so that's an area that I find a lot of moms, they're either naturally under eating just due to the nature of being a brand new parent and postpartum, and like, the lack of sleep and putting baby's needs first. And it's like, wait, oh, when was the last time I ate something? And then the other part of that is those who are intentionally under eating for, the sake of trying to get back to pre-pregnancy weight and like our bounce back culture. And like the immediate postpartum period is not a time to be cutting calories and cutting food groups. And yeah, to maintain milk supply, like supply and demand is important, but you have to eat enough food and drink enough water. And yes, I'm oversimplifying. Like there are many people who struggle because there are other underlying issues, but that's where one-on-one work with an IBCLC can come in and help. But yeah, just make sure you eat enough.
Yes, absolutely. So you obviously touched on some issues that could come into play with your breastfeeding journey. So what are the most common ones that you see besides the ones that we already talked about? Or you can just list the most common ones, even
Yeah.
if we talked about them.
The most common I see would be latching issues. And I mean, latching issues is like this huge umbrella term for many different, what's the underlying cause. But latching issues and supply issues would be the two main reasons that clients are asking for my support. Um, Pumping issues is another, and sometimes it's not always like a supply issue. It's more like, how do I get this thing to work properly? Or like planning for like going away for an event or something like that, and they've got to start pumping. Um, but like I've worked with clients on like bottle feeding issues or breast refusal issues, trying to get a baby back to the breast who's been bottle fed for a while because they had a latching issue, they didn't have the support that they needed. But it almost all of them boil down to there's some aspect around latching and or supply. And sometimes it's just an education piece is missing. And a lot of the times though, there is an underlying issue. Like latching, for example, it could be related to positioning, or it could be a tongue tie, or it could be a baby who was induced for whatever reason to come early and they're just naturally very sleepy, difficult to stay on at the breast. We've got to wake these babies to feed. Babies who are jaundiced, they're also very sleepy. And so this causes, latching challenges. Forceps or vacuum delivery, baby could be a little sore, uncomfortable. That's a latching issue. And so, it says latching issue, but then that my job is, well, okay, what is the underlying cause? What else could be like, what's at play here leading to this issue around latching?
That is beautiful. Yeah, because there's so many things that could play into whatever issue there is. Like, I never feel like it's just like a one issue. Like, it's like, let's go back and kind of work backwards and then come back around to this issue because you're right. Like there's so many things that it could be. So what would be your best tip to leave people with? Just if they're like planning to breastfeed and they're not there yet, but they are planning to breastfeed. And I guess this would be like they're planning for a VBAC, but
Yeah.
it could be a vaginal birth or it could be a cesarean. What would be your best tip for somebody planning to breastfeed?
I think it would be to think about what their goals are, because knowing that is really important because then you can pivot if your situation changes and you might have to shift things around slightly in order to still reach that goal. So if someone's goal is breastfeed, well, dig a little bit deeper. Like, what does that mean to you? Does that mean that you want to exclusively nurse them? Does that mean you want to pump and bottle feed, or yeah, pump and nurse? Does it mean you want to do mostly breast milk? What does it mean? Is it like for 3 months, or I want to try 6 months? Because if you have a little bit more of an idea beyond just breastfeed, you are a little bit more likely to, be willing to pivot as things change. Like if you're going for a VBAC and it ends in a cesarean, but you know that, hey, I really want to breastfeed my baby for at least 6 months, then it's like, all right, you're going to you're going to do that hand expression and get the colostrum out more so than like, well, I kind of wanted to breastfeed, but like, maybe like it really depends on what your goals are. Obviously take a prenatal breastfeeding class or meet with a lactation consultant one-on-one, but I think really thinking about like, what does it mean to me, is important.
Yes, that is perfect because it relates to birth so much too. Because it's like, of course, we could plan for this like ideal, beautiful birth, but a lot of times in birth, it's so unpredictable and we have to pivot, and it's like pivoting in the way that feels best to you. That way, you're still like feel in control because, we have a lot of issues with control and feeling in control, feeling heard, feeling like we're supported in whatever decision we end up making. Because, I mean, there is no right decision in my mind. Whatever decision you feel is best for you is the right decision. It doesn't matter what my views on it, your doctor's views on it, your family's views. Like, it's about you ultimately and your baby. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree completely. I always say, like if someone's ever curious, like I don't go into any of my consultations with an agenda. Like my goal is whatever your goals are. I'm not
Yes.
bringing like my personal desires for feeding my own baby into your breastfeeding relationship because it's your breastfeeding relationship. You get to do whatever it is you want to do as long as you're able to make informed decisions.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that is perfection. I love that that's the way that you practice. So, if somebody were to want to like work with you, either in person or virtually, if you offer virtual, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so I do virtual consultations and I do in person for those who are local to me. My website is motherhoodbloomslactation.com. And from there is all the tabs you need right at the top to book a consult with me. It's literally right under work with me. And you can learn more about me. You can see my fee schedule and things like that. I also have all of my online courses are linked there. So the website would be the place to go.
Perfect. I love that so much. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of your amazing knowledge. Like, I feel like this was such like a jam-packed episode. Like, people are going to get so much value out of this. So, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. There was a lot. We covered a whole lot, but I'm so grateful to have been able to chat with you.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the VBAC Junkie podcast. Make sure to leave a rating and subscribe to the show so that you don't miss an episode. And also, I have a free gift for you. If you would like to have a guide on how to prepare for a VBAC, head to my website at www.birthingcometrue.com/VBAC guide. And all of this will be in the show notes, so you can just click that link and head there and download this free guide. I hope you have an amazing week. Until next time, bye.